Through a number of takes and keep on going.
Okay. So I can just start anytime?
Yep, you bet.
All right. That's hot. That's not hot. That's hot. Not hot. That's hot. All right.
Good.
Because we can,
All right.
we can edit. Was that okay? Like,
inviting a variety of your audience to actually look at your work and to say, does that even resonate with them?
So not forcing an answer between 5 choices.
Absolutely, and to me, that also gets at objectivity in a very different way.
The emotional truth is important, but then it's important what you do with it.
Welcome to What's Hot, What's Not in Qualitative Research. I'm Kakali Bhattacharya, and with me you have Dr. AnaLouise Keating. Welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Keating and I have been working collaboratively for some years, and I've been admiring her work for many years before I even met her. So one of the things that bonds us together is working with spirit and inquiry. So I thought maybe one of the things we'll do today is maybe start talking about what the spirit means to us.
Okay. Oh, and you want me to go first? You know, and I don't really think what we call it is matters. Like, I think I tend to think of it as consciousness or as the sacred. And to me, it means some kind of life force or energy or quality that imbues everything, that is a source and that creates everything.
Dr. AnaLouise Keating is also a Gloria Anzaldúan scholar. So what you just said also reminds me of Gloria's definition of spirit too, that there is this source energy through which everything emanates.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and really, I guess we could like connect it with the Neoplatonists and think of Plotinus, because Plotinus kind of has a version of that also. Although I think that's different because it's hierarchical, and this is the idea that it's this spirit kind of thing would be non-hierarchical. So how do you define spirit?
That's good. Thank you for asking me that question.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think, for me, I grew up culturally Hindu in India, right? So in Indian mythology, there is a mythology called the Bhagavad Gita. So in that mythology, there was a conflict. There was a big battle. There was a war, and it was between two families over family stuff. And so within that war, there was this one warrior who had Krishna, who was a sort of divinity manifested in human form, as his chariot driver. And so Krishna looks over the battlefield, and on the other side of the battlefield, there's all his family members, cousins, first cousins, teachers, elders, and they're now at war with each other. And he said, I don't know how I can pick up weapon against my own, And so Krishna then revealed to him how the universe is in him and in everything else, and said, if you think that you're destroying anything, you're not really. This is sort of this play that is happening and unfolding, and you have a role in it, but to not be that arrogant to think you are doing something, And through that, he showed that everything in existence, everything is in him, and he is in everything else. It's a little bit masculine, but I kind of ignore that and make it gender neutral in my head, make it an energy in my head, And so then for me, I consider spirit exists in everything, which is part of the reason why I've always resonated with Anzaldúan work. And I'm like, but she's not Hindu, but she's saying things that I'm very familiar with. I don't know, I'm not appropriating, but I'm just resonating because I've lived similarly or understood consciousness similarly. So to me, it exists in everything. And so part of that allows me to let my students be able to talk spirituality in class, because they think that if they do that, people don't take them seriously, which, so when they write their positions, I'm like, if you are spiritual and spirituality drives the way you see the world, talk about it. I'm okay with that. You're not going to alienate me because you have some faith-based belief or spirituality that is not faith-based, So that's how I see spirituality you know. I was wondering, like, when you talk about spirit in an academic space, do you find like students receive it well, or do you find students feel uncomfortable?
I go in expecting so little that I find they always receive it better than I expected that they would. And I really try to frame it. I try to give a definition of some sort. I distinguish it from organized religion while acknowledging the overlap, because I realize there's so many ways to just dismiss it, right? And then I really emphasize that the term we call it doesn't matter. And sometimes I might connect it with animism. I mean, animism is a worldview and a philosophy that many peoples have had for centuries and centuries, so there's a lot of wisdom there. So I try to kind of like pitch it in multiple ways and just see where they are with it. And I mean, and probably unfortunately, I can't tell if, I mean, like, I think the resistance would be the hardest to know, right? Because I think it's so hard for students. It doesn't matter, you know, whether we're doing grades or whether it's just a conversation. I think sometimes they can just be reluctant to disagree.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. You know, the more I get involved with Anzaldúan stuff, the more I think about how do I do inquiry with that, you know? And then I know today we had that talk and you talked about it. You know, I wonder if you have had done inquiry, like where maybe you have collected data but used completely Anzaldúan ways of doing it. Have you?
I would not, I mean, like, I think the opportunity to do this talk, one of the reasons I'm like so glad, is because now I have these new questions to think about and these new frameworks to think about. So now I could think about what would that look like, right? So I do think like I could take the beginning of chapter 2 in Light in the Dark, and I could say this could be a method, and then I could see what it is, right? I think that, I mean, what I'm calling her decolonial reading process, I mean, like, is that her method, or is that me saying, hey, this can be a method? And, you know, I don't even know. But I mean, that's an approach I'm interested in trying to use more as a method, like as I work on the chapters for my next book. Yeah.
Do you want to ask me something?
I do.
Okay.
What should I ask you? So what first attracted you to Anzaldúan's work?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I was in graduate school at Georgia, which is a predominantly white space, and I felt like I didn't know how to fit into that space. And I was in theory class, but the theory class were very much the continental philosophers. And I liked it. I was very seduced by it. I used to go to bed with Foucault a lot, you know? So I liked it, you know? So the dead white French guys were the people I went to sleep with every night. And it's very seductive because, you know, it taught me how to understand structures. It taught me how to deconstruct them. It was very seductive, especially when you're at the bottom of the totem pole as a graduate student, you know? And then I began to take women's studies classes, and I got a graduate certificate in it. And that's where I got introduced to Anzaldúan's work. And it was different from anything I've ever read, ever, you know? And so it spoke to me in ways nothing else did, and it cut me deep. Now I realize why, because she connected with Sri Aurobindo, and I was very familiar with that. I was initiated by, you know, an organization that is very grounded in his philosophy, so I understood that. I've always felt it was very invitational. It disrupted my Anglocentric way of reading. It talked about my, not ambivalence, because I never felt ambivalent, but it talked about the sort of the mestiza stuff that she was bringing, but in different conceptual terms than what she was identifying as. And so I was just, it's like every word felt like there was not a single word that was wasted on paper for her. Every word felt like a gem. Every sentence felt like has, you know, eons of wisdom in it, you know, and I could sit with like a 1 or 2 sentence for like 3 days and just go off somewhere with it. So it was so deep and it was so rich that I just stayed with it and it never left me. So I think Gloria never left me. You know, she invited, I walked in, and she still stayed and I stayed, you know, and I've never met her in person. So all I know about her is through you and through other resources that are out there. I feel such a connection to her, and her work does that with a lot of people, that they feel very connected. And then over the years, I started unlearning some of the things that I learned, and that unlearning produced this new space for me to do the work. But so much of it was the courage I got to do that work was through the things that Gloria was doing at a time where she did things that weren't even academic, like traditionally academic, and yet the depth of it was, soul shifting, And then when you brought out the light and the dark text, and I was supposed to be her dissertation, it just blew my mind away that she was thinking that way and she was going to put that out as a dissertation. Like there's so much brave space in there. She's creating so much brave space in there that I was just blown away. So, the deeper I go into her work, I feel like the more work I'm doing on myself.
Yeah, I love how she has that effect, right? I mean, and like I talk about it in the beginning of the interview book as risking the personal. Because she was so willing to take those huge risks, she models it for us, but also she's excavating herself, but she's doing it in this way that like makes connections with other people that, I mean, it's pretty rare.
It is. And she's influenced me to be more vulnerable in my work. And so because I become vulnerable in my work, a lot of people who read my work say, you're the most real person we know. And I'm like, yes, I know that you see that, but trace me back and you'll see it's Anzaldúan experience influence that gives me the strength to do that kind of work.
I feel that way too. Like that model and just that energy moving forward kind of helped clear the space.
Yeah. So today we talked about method. It's a new space for you.
Yes.
In coming into method. So where are your head at over there? Are you still feeling like you're just treading, or are you kind of getting into it a little bit deeper?
Well, I mean, I think it is. I have been tricking myself to think I don't have a method, right? I mean, and I had that privilege or whatever you want to call it, just because I just took so many literature courses, and I took a lot of literary theory courses, and so I guess theorizing was my method, plus close reading of text. That's a method, right?
Right.
So I need to like stop like being all, well, I don't really do method, right? Because I don't do like conventional social science methods doesn't mean I don't do methods.
Right.
I need to think more seriously about that and what it means, and sometimes I think it's a matter of like just being bold and starting to claim the terms more, or think about them, right, as method. So that's where I'm at. I'm like moving forward.
Yeah. Well, Gloria's work was so influential that, that paper I wrote about mixing mediums, mixing selves, I was using a lot of things inspired by Gloria's method, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing until I sat back and looked at it. So I had a class that went really well, and I was really surprised because that was first time I, made certain texts very required texts, and I wasn't sure how students would respond to a decolonizing methodology as a required text, written from a Maori indigenous perspective. How does that relate to us? So I wasn't sure how they would react to it. And then I had a lot of creativity inspired inquiry and contemplative inquiry, and they were doing art making to process their stuff. And so when that was happening, the students that semester responded really positively to it. And I just, that doesn't always happen, that there's a unanimous sort of acceptance of all the new crazy things you're putting out there. So I wanted to see why. So I invited them to conversations after class had ended. And so we had these deep transcripts that we did. And then when I wanted to analyze a transcript, I didn't particularly want to have a method that is traditionally understood, but I wanted to have a method that was spirit-driven. So we would, I don't know if I told you this, so we would have our living room where it was my previous graduate assistant, Paul, and me, and we would do sort of an affirmation of prayer, invite in people or beings that are helpful and will guide us. And I would create an imaginary circle around us so that's the safe space, brave space for us. Paul would put some music on. Well, one of the nights we were doing this, it was Halloween night, right? So there were kids that were stopping by. And the floor of the living room had canvas and paint and crayons and markers. I kid you not, there were these kids that were coming in and their parents couldn't keep up with them. They came in straight inside the circle.
Wow.
Walked around our couches, ran straight inside. They wouldn't leave. And the parents are like, we're so sorry. And I'm like, this is strange, but I might have an understanding as to what was happening there. You know, they felt the energy and they resonated to it. And it was an energy that was obviously familiar to them, you know, and they resonate, and a safe energy, very safe energy, you know, and they went through, and the parents would come like, we're sorry, come out of there, you're not supposed to go inside their house, you know. So that happened. But that was, when we did that, you know, we were listening to music, we were meditating, then we would paint, then we would write, channeled writing that you were talking about. So we'd do some channeled writing while the paint was drying, then we would paint on top of it. What do we want to hide? What do we want to keep? So when we think about what we're hiding, we were thinking about the shadow work. It just was so, you know, rich and multi-layered, you know. So that's how I've begun to think of doing method, and I can't replicate that, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, like you can't, another version of it, or the steps of it, or
the steps of it.
Yeah. You can't replicate the steps of it.
No.
Why not?
Because, you know, like,
well, the Halloween, okay.
It's not Halloween every day. Kids are not running into your room every day. But no, I think because it was, you know, I can replicate building a safe circle. I can replicate that. I can replicate calling in, you know, energies and ancestors that, you know, hold safe space for you. I can replicate that. But then what happens, I can't replicate after that part.
Right. Yes. Yeah. But that's like the magic of it.
Yes.
Right? I mean, and that's another thing I want to think about, how to like think about magic as part of method.
Yes.
I seriously do.
Yes.
Because this is another, I mean, I think I've been kind of playing with that idea, just thinking about it a little bit, but then just thinking of Anzaldúan's Poetry and Magic manuscript, I'm like, you know, it's time to like, why not go there? Like, why not think about what might that look like?
So she has a manuscript on poetry and magic. Are you going to publish it, do you think?
It's really a draft. It's like, you know, like, it's like if you're going to make a stew at some point, so you just throw a lot of stuff in. No, you put it in it. Maybe you put it on the table and it's all just there, but it needs to be all sort of fixed. And so I think it's probably too rough. But there's some sections that I think maybe could be taken out. I don't know. It's pretty cool, and she's completely mixing magic with writing and writing prompts and meditations for writing. It's yeah.
I love that. I love that. I wonder, you know, like, people have so many different ways of thinking of magic. And for some people, magic is not within their cultural constructs, but they do spirit work, but they don't think that it's magic.
Right.
You know, it's different type of spirit work, you know. And I have friends who do spirit work from, like, you know, West African perspective and, you know, Ocean perspective. And they don't resonate with magic. They talk about it a different way. You know, so what's magic? Or how did Anzaldúa think of magic?
You know, I would want to go look through things to see what her definition was. So I can't say that.
Okay.
I mean, and I would also want to think about what influenced her. Like, this was when she was in San Francisco. This was like the really early 80s. So, you know, she was questioning the whole Wiccan community and Starhawk. Sure, but like, how was that? You know, and what role did Louisa Tiche with Jambalaya play? Probably a big role. So that could all be in it. I think of magic as a kind of energy work, a kind of spirit work, based on, that really like draws on relationality and correspondence.
Yeah, I do too. That's how I think of it. But I've talked to colleagues who have a very different delineation of it, you know, and they don't call the energy work part of it as magic. So I wondered about that. But, you know, I've never been hung up on terms before.
Right.
You know, I just do what I need to do, say what I need to say, and then just do it.
Yeah, and I think different terms work for different audiences. I mean, in Anzaldúa also, in some of her manuscripts, she talks about alchemy.
Right, I saw that.
And so then if you think of alchemy as a process that is using energy and relationship, but also like stuff, like, you know, material stuff, that's interesting to think about too.
Yeah, the transmutation of it. Yeah, definitely, definitely. So what's next? What are you going to do with this method, magic method?
That's it. I mean, I really need to finish my books. So I want to think about this method and magic and things like that as I think about women and spiritual activism, and as I think about social justice work, and as I think about what role can this play in social justice work, and then I want to think about it in terms of what role can it play in the writing process, right? So thinking especially of an audience, like a primary audience of women of color academics and students, and the writing blocks, and what are ways we can get through those writing blocks. So that, and then I just want to continue like examining myself using these methods more. And I want to really think about Anzaldúa, conocimiento, and its connection with method, and its connection with spiritual activism, and how they all work together, right? And then the imaginal, and what she was doing with the imaginal, and how does that function as part of method.
Right.
So yeah, tons of ideas.
So this series is called What's Hot, What's Not in Qualitative Research. So this would be the what's hot part for you. You know, a lot of onto epistemic orientations, then, you know, built through embodied excavation, you know, through which different methods are emerging, or we're bringing methods to awareness, you know. So the other part of this conversation is what's not hot. So are there things, you know, in your journey so far that maybe you were once excited about, but now you're kind of like, I finished that journey?
Oh, other things that I'm like, I finished that journey.
And we don't have to be like negative about it, just, you know, but just kind of like, that's no longer the space in which you exist.
Boy, you know, I find that I would have to really think about that question more. I have like nothing's coming to my head. I mean, I think I find myself relying more heavily on Anzaldúa's theories and on my own experience as I write about Anzaldúa, and a little less on other scholarship. And I don't know if that's good or bad, actually. You know, I don't know if that's you know. What about you? And then maybe that'll help me think of something.
Yeah, and then I already thought of another question, and we have to wrap up soon. So you know, for me, I feel like I want to really do a deep tracing of roots and routes. So that's where I'm at. So that means I'm grounding myself into a lot of unconventional ways of doing academic work. So I'm not necessarily like in opposition to conventional academic work, because, you know, different contexts need different type of inquiry. So I'm okay with that. But you know, the more and more I do the work that I do, and because I'm doing so much unlearning of things that were taught to me, that I'm moving a lot away from the traditional established ways of doing inquiry and method, especially in qualitative research. So in qualitative research, a lot of that discussion has been through a very Anglo-centric onto epistemologies, and so that was more or less through which, you know, I entered, and that is qualitative research is mostly published in U.S., Canada, Australia, English-speaking parts in Europe. So because of that, you know, I'm always engaged in that sort of discussion, and I continuously want to carve out a space that is creative and contemplative. So I'm kind of moving away. It's not that if my students want to do traditional work, that's fine. I will support them. It's just no longer my work.
Right.
You know, so it's no longer my work. But there was one thing I wanted to ask you, and now it has escaped me. Were you going to say anything?
No.
I was going to ask you something, and it escaped me. So then we'll just leave it there. I think I wanted. Oh yes, I remember. Sorry. One last thing, and then I think we can wrap up. I know the answer to this, but I imagine that there will be students who would be, you know, listening to this, and they would have this question. And your students would already know this, but my students probably won't. And they would probably have this question where they would say, why do you center Anzaldúa's work so much, you know, when other discourses don't? And they center, you know, more of the continental philosophers, and you center Anzaldúa's work.
I think that Anzaldúa is doing philosophy. I mean, if we want to call it philosophy, And I don't think that her work has been read that way. And I don't think that she has received the attention that she should receive as a thinker. And because she was pushed to so many margins, she came up with different ways of thinking, right? And so I think that what she developed really has opportunity to speak to like many people and to be truly transformational, combined with just the way she's bringing together so many different disciplines. So it's really exciting to me to see you and other people who are not like, oh, I'm in the humanities, you know, right? Like really like embracing her work. And by doing that, you're like showing all these other ways to use it and appreciate it and benefit from it, and then we see new insights. And the fact that her work can function like that as so multifaceted, just, you know, that's part of why also.
Yeah. I feel like she's also this spiritual sociologist.
Nice.
You know?
Yeah.
She thinks about the social processes of humanity through a very spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
You know, so of course it appeals to me as a social scientist as well.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And then I just love the way she brings in myth in such deep ways.
Yes,
right?
most definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for watching this edition of What's Hot, What's Not in Qualitative Research.